Hello, BookTube. All right, we're continuing our read-along of Anthony Trollope's book, The American Senator. This is part of our year-long attempt to consort with lonely Trollops, to read standalone Trollope novels that aren't part of his two major series. And this is a story, as you can tell from the title, partly of an American senator, a somewhat naive and bumptious American senator who comes to the England of Trollope's day, essentially, in order to observe. He's a house guest of people and asks all sorts of detailed questions, and then fatally starts to get involved with something that he perceives as an injustice. He tries the patience of everyone involved, all the characters involved in this novel. And listening to some of your comments, I get the impression that he tries your patience as well. I'd be willing to bet that's been a common response to this book. Certainly, rereading it for our read along, I have had less and less patience with Senator Go to Bed. At first I was a little bit interested in his sort of stranger in a strange land contrast with all the customs and people that he was meeting. But now we're at the halfway point of the novel. Now, when I see that he's going to be the focal point of the next chapter, I am sorely tried. Sorely tried. He's a one-note character. Trollope decided, I think very intentionally, not to make him personally interesting. He decided to make him instead a sounding board, all the better to view society through him. But I don't think that's a good decision at all. In The Prime Minister, for instance, a very contemporaneous book with this, the sounding board character is Ferdinand Lopez, who is an outsider and a contemptible, interesting, magnetic, unscrupulous quasi-villain. In The Way We Live Now, the outsider, again, through whom we're going to look at English society, is Mr. Melmotte, who is certainly fascinating in his own right. He may be one-dimensional like Mr. Go-to-Bed, but he's a different kind of one-dimensional. It's a better dimension, more interesting to read. There's nothing worse if you're going to do a State of England novel where you have a focal point character. There's nothing worse, I think, than having the focal point character be boring. And Mr. Senator Go-to-Bed is. And in the chapters that we're reading for today, he has a part. He is involved in a plot line, and it's interesting, I guess, in a way. But I think by far the more memorable plot line in the chapters that we're reading today is Arabella Trefoil, the book's real main character, a young woman who is... Trollope is brutal with her. He's usually wonderful in physically describing the physical affect of his female characters. He's usually wonderful about that, even if he has negative things to say about their personalities. But Arabella Trefoil, I don't know if you've noticed, but every time that he consents to describe anything about her, he is brutal about her. He doesn't like her at all. And that ought to make it fatal. That ought to ruin the device. But I think he wrought better than he knew, because a lot of readers like this character, even though she is soiling. She is sordid. She and her mother have eaten, their wasteful father has eaten through all of the family's money, all of his wife's money. The father is given an allowance by his brother, who is a duke. And Arabella Trefoil and her mother basically flit gypsy style from one relative and friend's house to another all season long, with her goal and essence in life being to find a husband who has money, a husband who will save her from this life of being essentially a vagabond. And we get the clear impression of Arabella Trefoil that long ago, that quest hollowed out all of her warmer human instincts and left in its place an absolutely mercenary lizard, which means that she ought to be off-putting, but she isn't any more than Lizzie Eustace was. She isn't. I could read about her in this whole book. I could easily dispense with the American Senator parts of the American Senator. And in the chapters that we're reading today, we see the quest that she has been on come to a head. There is a nobleman. He's fairly young, Lord Rufford. He has wealth and estates that are unembarrassed. He is single. And he plans to stay that way. We're told in an earlier block of chapters that he intends to be a bachelor until he absolutely can't avoid it, until he has to sire an heir in order to keep his property going. But he has no interest otherwise. He is a trifler with women's affections otherwise. A good chap, but a little bit on the wistful, thoughtless side. And Arabella Trefoil sets her sights on him right away. She had another man in mind. And he was not anything near as grand, but he did love her and promised her a lot. And she thought her gamble with Lord Rufford is that she could do better. That she could be Lady Rufford. That all of this could be hers. And she sets her sights on Lord Rufford and immediately tries to entrap him into the customs of the day. If he trifles with her affection, he has to deal with social opprobrium and also with the condemnation and maybe violence from her male relatives. And those customs are still very much in place. And she knows that all she has to do is get Lord Rufford to be indiscreet a couple of times, and then she can just claim, you owe me now. You owe me marriage now. Or I will ruin your name and reputation, and maybe my nearest male relative will ruin your nose, or something like that. And a couple of those incidents happen. She fake faints against him in a carriage. He gives her a horse that she's fond of. There's enough on the surface level for someone who is machinating along exactly those lines to construe that an offer had been implied. No offer has been said. Lord Rufford has never said to her, gee, it would be great if you were my wife. He's never asked her. But he has compromised himself enough so that she thinks that she has a claim to that, and it's all she wants. She's willing to gamble. We're told over and over again that she's willing to gamble everything in her world for that. Her uncle and her uncle's wife don't like her. The Duke and his wife don't like her, and they are right on the edge of needing an excuse to ban her from their house and their society, which would mean a lot. That would hurt her social standing quite a bit. She's willing to risk all of that to entrap Lord Rufford. And it almost works. He senses that the trap is closing. He very much does not want to marry her, and they're at the country estate of her uncle, when he sneaks out first thing in the morning the next day, rather than face the music, rather than worry about the complications of it. And everyone in the household knows why he's done that. Everyone puts two and two together. But in the chapters that we're reading today, she decides to be undaunted by that. She decides to stick to him like a leech, is how she puts it, and sends him a letter, and then another letter. Jovial, jocular letters, but nevertheless mentioning engagement. And he is bothered by this. He's not anywhere around her. He's sort of decided that he's going to avoid her. He knows he doesn't want to marry her. And eventually he consults with a family advisor who decides, well, you need to put an end to this. It's bad enough as it is. You can't just let things go. So we will write a letter. And he writes a letter to her. I think I turned down the page. Yes, this is a classic Trollope letter. It's not very long. Arabella Trefoil really wants it to be longer. Her whole future hangs on this letter. Dear Miss Trefoil, it is a great grief to me that I should have to answer your letter in a manner that I fear will not be satisfactory to you. I can only say that you have altogether mistaken me if you think that I have said anything which was intended as an offer of marriage. I cannot but be very much flattered by your good opinion. I've had much pleasure from our acquaintance, and I should be glad if it could be continued. But I have had no thoughts of marriage. If I have said a word which has, unintentionally on my part, given rise to such an idea, I can only beg your pardon heartily. If I were to add more after what I have now said, perhaps you would take it as an impertinence. Yours very sincerely, Rufford. And that should put an end to it, but it doesn't. Arabella Trefoil knows that her whole future is on the line. She can't allow it to be the end. She decides to make as big a problem as she can. She goes to her father. She has her father go to her uncle. The uncle has an heir who is roughly 30 years old and who could act roughly in the place of her brother. She tells her mother that I'm not done by any means. He has thrown me over, but I will see. He has not seen the last of me. And it's kind of odd because at the same time that she's saying that, what is the ultimate outcome of that course of action? The outcome that she's hoping for is that she will force Lord Rufford to marry her. And she's smart enough to know what marriage would result from that. It would be hateful. It would be two people who don't like each other at all. And she outright says that to her mother. She says that I have no interest in having a marriage like yours to father, which is loveless. But that's exactly what she's angling for. As we get the impression in these pages that her main motivation is that she is bone weary of poverty. She wants the end, an end to wandering, an end to scrounging, an end to constantly hiding from creditors or short-shifting the baker or whatever. She wants an end to poverty, which is a very Trollopean way to look at things. And that essentially is where our chapters today come to a boil. All of this is we're about to reconvene at the country house where all this trouble started. And that is where we will end for today. And our next read-along, we will just finish this book. So I'm, of course, as always, curious to know what you're all making of this. I started off rather harsh on Senator Go to Bed, and maybe I shouldn't be. Are there any of you who are still chuckling or smiling over his misadventures, his bumbling misreading of English society? I'd be curious to know if you are. I would imagine that by this point, all the people that are reading this book are totally caught up in Arabella Trefoil's story. Even if you can't root for her, even if you don't really like her, you realize that in a weird kind of worldly way, what she's doing takes courage, more courage than anyone in the book. Even though the end is bad, even though the end is unworthy, even though the course of action is bad, full of lies, there's still something about her. She has that weird kind of mesmerizing quality that only really great characters can have, even if you don't like them. So I'm curious to know, are most of you in Camp Arabella by now and have left Senator Go to Bed far away and don't really care what happens to the honorable member from Mikawa? I'd be curious to know about that. But we're going to finish this up for next weekend. And a number of you have told me that leaves us an extra weekend in May. And what are we going to do? And I'm thinking that maybe it might be nice to have a weekend in May in which we're not doing 4 read-alongs on one day, on Sunday. And maybe it'd be nice to have a weekend with no read-alongs. Maybe, maybe kinda. So I haven't quite decided what our next Trollope book will be. I'm leaning towards the Claverings, but only a bit. There are plenty of other candidates. So I will mull it over, and I'm going to make an announcement video, a whole bunch of things that I want to talk about later in the week. I want to give you second thoughts on a whole bunch of books that a lot of you expressed interest about. I want to give you a report on my Kindle Paperwhite. So I'll make a catch-all kind of announcement video later in the week when we'll decide on the next Trollope book. For now, we'll just finish this one and have a weekend off, I think. So I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I want to hear what you think, and we will be back to finish The American Senator next Sunday. So I'll see you then. Thank you, BookTube.